Hey everybody, I just wanted to jump in quick before the episode gets started to kind of give you a heads up on what the discussion episode is and what I initially planned it to be and kind of what it turned out to be. It kind of took on a life of its own as we sat and talked. So essentially we talked about Bigfoot, but I barely looked at my notes. I didn't get too much into like the history or the theories or anything like that. It was mostly just storytelling, and we touched on fear a little bit, and towards the end we even strayed off quite a ways into video games and movies and stuff like that. But yeah, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up on what was coming. Some people probably have a little bit of different expectation. I know I did, even just in the recording of it. But all in all, I'm not unhappy with what came out, so I hope you guys enjoy. Thanks. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Lone Crow Podcast. I'm your host, Douglas Mackay, and tonight is the first discussion episode. Basically, how it's going to go is essentially just a discussion. It's going to be, we talk about the topic and tell some stories. I'm leaning more into the story aspect of it, because that's kind of what this podcast is about. A little bit of history, a little bit of storytelling and stuff. So tonight I am joined by the mountain beast himself, Justin Chernipeski.
Hey everyone.
And we're going to be talking about Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Yowie or Yeti or skunk ape, one of the many different terms. So I'm going to quickly give a very brief description of what this creature is. Mostly because I know that most of my current listeners will know what Bigfoot is, and most people in general know what Bigfoot is, but it is the tall, usually described anywhere between 7 to 15 feet tall, and covered in hair, giant feet, essentially an ape man. The Bigfoot lives, or is believed to live, in the Pacific Northwest. Sasquatch, the Canadian version, I guess, lives throughout the Rockies. You have the Yowie in Australia, the Yeti in the Himalayas. And yeah, I mean, it's essentially a story and a creature that, much like the werewolf, kind of disobeys borders. It doesn't stop geographically anywhere. It seems like there's a story of ape men on every continent and in a lot of countries around the world. It's a story that dates back to before Europeans ever landed in North America. Stories passed on by the Native Americans. And it seems to, like I said, span the globe. So I'm going to let Justin kind of introduce himself for everyone who knows him and maybe future people who don't. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Justin Chernipeski, and well, like you said before, a lot of the listeners probably already know what Bigfoot is, and we know a lot of the listeners right now know what Mountain Beast Mysteries is.
Yeah.
And I run that YouTube channel. So Mountain Beast Mysteries basically is a YouTube channel dedicated to providing information and about the Bigfoot topic, whether it be, reviewing footage or going over stories. But what we do best is, film expeditions and basically adventures out in the field looking for the Sasquatch. And we started doing that back in 2014.
You say we, but it's mostly you, right?
It's mostly me, but there's other people involved sometimes.
Right.
The crew seems to change every now and then. Like, I'll have different people tagging along. For the most part, I guess, it's just me.
Yeah.
But it is nice when you have other people to go out in the field with you to help out and, give you some peace of mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bigfoot. I mean, you've talked about the Wendigo and the werewolf thing on your previous 2 episodes. Bigfoot, compared to those two, is a more like tangible legend that people are actively out searching for. I don't know anyone who's searching for the Wendigo
or werewolves.
Yeah, I don't know anyone who would want to run into the Wendigo.
It's definitely something that has really it is based on what I found in my research. It kind of had its resurgence into mainstream media or pop culture back in the 60s, essentially with the release of the Patterson footage that kind of recaptured everyone's imagination about it. It kind of had a sprinkling of stories throughout the early 1900s, and then that Patterson footage came out and it became a phenomenon again.
Yeah, it was super popular through the 70s. There's so many old films and documentaries and mockumentaries from that time. That seems to be like when it was most popular, other than nowadays. Like, right. It's pretty popular. But, and we have the legends that go back way before that, which is the most interesting thing, in my opinion, are stories that go back from before, like, the 60s and 50s.
Right.
Because it seems like the general public thinks that was, like, the birthplace of Bigfoot was that time.
Right.
Like the Patterson footage, and there was some events back in the 50s where tracks were found. The term Bigfoot was given to it, but when you look deep into it, there's a lot of stories, and like quite famous ones from before that, like back in the 20s,
right?
And then as early as like the 1800s, and
you have the folklore of the Native American people.
Yes,
and from what I kind of found while researching the topic was a lot of the Native American stories seem to treat the Bigfoot as one. I guess it depends on which tribe you look at. I found, close to, it had to be at least 30 different names from all the different tribes, and they all had different descriptions. To some it was like this cannibalistic monster. To others it was just treated like a separate tribe of native, just covered in hair. And others saw it as like a woodland spirit that protected nature. And it had all these different, I guess, faces throughout the lore, and it seems to go back centuries. And then when Europeans came over, they heard about it, and there's a few cases of supposed witnesses and everything like that, and then it just kind of grew off of that over time. So you actively go out on expeditions looking for evidence of Bigfoot, essentially. Yeah. And because, as I've mentioned in videos that I did with you on your channel, this podcast, this discussion, we're not going to talk about whether or not we think it's real. There's not going to be any kind of judgment calls or opinions on that. What I'm here for is to get some of your stories and to tell some stories that we've heard growing up and what you've heard recently, because they're good stories to tell. They're the stories for me personally that when I'm out camping, they come to the forefront of my mind, because you're just surrounded by bush and mountain, and all you can think is, what if there's a giant ape man just past the edge of the trees? What would you consider, I guess, some of your more intense moments out in the bush?
Intense moments?
Yeah, moments that really put you on edge.
Well, there's a recent one, and it's in the Supernatural Sasquatch documentary that I put up not that long ago on the channel. And we still don't know like what it was, but whatever it was at the time, I was freaked out.
Right.
Because in my mind I thought I was about to see one and come face to face with it. But what happened basically is me and this individual who was having these close encounters on his property, he had called me out to check things out. And, you know, he phoned me and he's like, yeah, they're here right now. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's probably a good time to go check it out, right? Because this is probably the best odds I would ever have of seeing one.
I mean, you get a phone call of someone telling you it is here and come now and you'll probably see it. Yeah. You want to jump on that.
And not just it, but like them.
Right.
It was implied that there was more than one. But I ended up going out there and we walked the whole property quite thoroughly and didn't see any sort of like being that was like, we didn't see anything really. We found tracks, or what we think are tracks. They look like Bigfoot tracks, like your typical Bigfoot track in the snow. But before I was about to leave, I had put my camera in my car and was ready to go. And the guy was like, yeah, let's just go like take a measuring tape and just go measure that one track. And I was ready to leave because it was already getting pretty late.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I'll be back tomorrow. We can just do it then. And he's like, no, let's go do it now. I'm like, okay, whatever. So we went to this track and we're measuring it and we're standing there. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, these extremely loud footsteps are like running towards us really close, but just like out of sight in the darkness. Right. And over this embankment, like a very steep embankment. And at that point, when these, like, because they sounded like a bipedal being, when we heard the sounds, like, I can't even describe the feeling that was like going through my heart.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was it. Like, I didn't really know what was going to happen, but I imagined that it was a Sasquatch.
Right.
And that's what was
and
going
it was
through
coming
like,
through
there's
the bush
a Sasquatch
to
running
get you.
at us.
Yeah.
Crap. And I just froze. Like I didn't even have the sense to like run if that was an option. Like, yeah. I'm sure you couldn't outrun one, but it wasn't even a thought. I just stood there and like, oh,
here we go.
The other guy was really scared too, like visually.
Yeah.
I looked at him and he's just like shaking in his boots.
Yeah.
And then we're like standing there and I'm like, hello? I call out to it. And then you hear this horse neigh sounds just like a horse. And I got that recorded because once we heard the footsteps, I pulled out my cell phone and I started filming in hopes of like hearing the footsteps again.
Right.
But we didn't hear the footsteps again. We just heard this one horse call. And it was very odd because we walked the whole property. There's a fence around the whole property.
Yeah.
The guy doesn't have any horses. So that was weird. Somehow while we were walking the property, a horse would have had to like sneak in the yard somehow.
Yeah. And
be walking around like right behind the house.
Right.
And the whole time we were just standing there listening for noises, never heard it approach.
Yeah. Well,
until it was right there and it was running what sounded like running towards us.
Right. Which is kind of odd, I guess. I mean, it depends. If you take into consideration a horse coming to it, what it thinks might be its owner or something like that, they might trot or whatever, but I don't think they'd full tilt run generally. I'm not a horse expert. I've just seen the ones that my girlfriend has at her place, but
yeah. But yeah, after that we didn't hear anything else. We didn't like see anything. Like I walked to the edge and like shone my light down there. Couldn't see anything. The thing is, it's theorized that these creatures might mimic other animals.
Right.
As far as like sounds go. Whether that be like birds or donkeys I've heard, or owls. It wouldn't be a big stretch to think that they can mimic horses, because in Alberta, like Nordegg is a really popular spot for Bigfooting, I guess, if you want to call it that. There's a lot of reports out of Nordegg, and almost every time I go to Nordegg, there's wild horses. Right. So they would be like an animal that would be coexisting with them, that they'd be used to, where they would know the sounds of that creature. So maybe it was a Sasquatch mimicking a horse. I don't know. We went out the next day in the daylight and walked everywhere. Couldn't find any horse tracks.
Right.
Like we walked multiple times around there, but we also didn't find any more Bigfoot tracks. So the whole thing was just odd and
right.
weird.
And
But
there's that the theory that you were kind of investigating in that documentary was the supernatural Sasquatch, the ability to essentially like phase out of physical existence, essentially.
yeah, I mean, when
Or
you think of those theories, it's way easier to explain all that stuff,
right.
right? But then when you say, maybe it is interdimensional, then you lose a lot of credibility, I guess.
Well, I guess, but I mean, it's like ghosts or anything like that, right? It's this idea that it doesn't necessarily exist on the same plane as us. Whether it's true or not, who cares? Because it's creepy as all hell if there's something like that out there, You had mentioned, I think it was in your first documentary, Wild Man: My Search for Sasquatch.
Yeah.
That you had an experience where you had just sat down around the fire and like set up camp.
Yeah.
And we're just essentially cameras were all put away and everything, and you were just getting ready to settle in for the night around the fire, and something, I guess, similar happened.
Well, it's not really similar.
Well, not. I mean, just in the
like
sense of you weren't expecting it, and then all of a sudden there was something where you had no choice but to go and look.
Yeah, there was me and 3 other guys, and our goal was to just go out and look for evidence and film it for that part of the film. It was the first day we were there. We arrived at the location like later in the evening. We set up all our tents and everything like that. And basically what I told them was, let's like not really start doing this until tomorrow, just because everyone was exhausted.
Yeah.
And like we just wanted to sit around the fire and relax for a bit. Now we should have had like cameras and stuff like ready. Like they were nearby, but we could have been a lot quicker. But it was getting late. It was around midnight, I think. And we're sitting around the campfire, and behind us in the bushes on the other side of the road, something suddenly made this cracking sound. It sounded like either a tree falling over or something pushing over a tree. And it was coincidentally right by our camp when we showed up.
Right.
And it was just getting like really dark. So it's like a weird coincidence where like there's a billion trees out here and the one that falls over is right where we decide to camp, where we're filming this Bigfoot thing in Bigfoot territory.
Right.
But anyways, we decided to do a little trek in the dark up this, like in the trees up the slope where we heard the noise come from. And we couldn't find anything. It was really hard to see in the dark. So the next plan was to head back up there in the morning when it was bright out. And we walked up that way and did some exploring. And then that's where we ended up finding these few tracks in the moss. They look like Bigfoot tracks. You could see 5 toes in them.
Right.
And they were 13, 14 inches, something like that. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But they were very strange. They look like naked human footprints, but a little bit bigger.
A bit bigger, yeah.
And like you think like, okay, that's very weird. There must be something here. Either it's a Bigfoot or there's naked people walking around in camp. Both equally as terrible.
So over time, there's been a lot of really popular Bigfoot stories, and I'm sure you've covered probably most of them on your channel by now. But this is a storytelling podcast, so why don't you give us a quick rundown of the Albert Ostman story?
Okay, the Albert Ostman story, that is one of the more famous encounters. This happened back in 1924, so it was before the Patterson footage, before this was all very popular. According to the story, he didn't really know about the Sasquatch until he met his First Nations guide that was going to be taking him into this area in the Toba Inlet on the west coast of BC. He was a prospector. He was going out to, just be out in the outdoors for a while, do some prospecting, just relax. And as he's being taking up the inlet, this guy's telling him that there's these Sasquatch creatures in the area. And he's like, yeah, probably not. Like, he didn't really buy into it, it seems.
Right.
But he goes off into the wilderness. He ends up finding a really nice camping spot eventually. He's there for a couple nights, and during those nights, something had been coming into his camp and, going through his pack and messing around with his things. And he suspected it was a porcupine, or something of that nature. He kind of initially thought maybe it was a bear as well, but he didn't find any bear tracks, so he kind of decided it was most likely a porcupine.
Right.
So he had this plan to go to sleep, have his rifle with him in his sleeping bag, and when the porcupine would show up at night, he would, kill it and make some soup or stew or something out of it.
Right.
This is all according to the story. So this one night he's in his sleeping bag, he has his rifle, he has his boots, some of his items, but he's awoken by, something picking him up inside of his sleeping bag. And according to the story that he told personally, he figured whatever this creature was carried him for something like 25 miles in a few hours, which is insane. That is so far for 3 hours of walking.
Right.
Now that could just be, like, that might not be accurate, because he was obviously excited. It might have been longer, might have been shorter.
You'd think it'd be difficult to really know, I guess, how long and how far you had gone when you're inside of a bag.
Exactly.
And also probably having a panic attack.
Yeah. But he was trying to, like, he said it felt kind of like he was on a horse or something. Like he could feel himself bumping into this creature.
Right.
But then he said it was making, like, coughing noises every now and then. And that's when he was like, oh, this might be one of those Sasquatch creatures. But anyways, when he's able to get out of his sleeping bag after he's dropped off in this area, it was initially dark, so he couldn't really see who his captors were. But eventually, when the sun rose and it was brighter out, he saw that he was with 4 of these Sasquatch creatures. Older male, older female, younger male, probably like late teens, if you were going to put an age on it.
Right. Like, if you're going to assume that they live similar lifespans as us.
Yeah. And then there was a younger female. And he's with these creatures, and especially the younger ones, they're very curious, and they're trying to figure him out. They're always hiding behind bushes, like, watching him. But they weren't really bothering him, as far as I know. They actually let him keep his things.
Right. And they fed him as well, did they not?
I believe so. They fed him some sort of grass or something of that nature. But he did have some food with him.
Okay.
Because as far as I know, I think whatever picked him up had his pack as well.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure he had some food with him. Like, I know he had coffee.
Right.
Because there was a point where he made coffee when he was with them. He had a tin of snuff, which is an important item for later on. But he's with these creatures for something like 6 days. And according to him, these creatures were, able to communicate with each other with a very, like, primitive language.
Right.
But eventually he decided, they're probably going to do something really weird to me. So he wanted to get away. And he ended up feeding his tin of snuff to the larger, older male Sasquatch, who, got very, very ill from that.
Yeah, as anyone who has ever swallowed snuff or chew by accident, it's not a great feeling in your stomach.
Yeah. And the older female was not very happy either about him trying to get away. And he claims that he fired a shot above her head. And once he did that, she kind of scurried off for cover. Okay. And then he took off. And he was able to make it back to, I guess, people. I believe he ran into a logger. And he said he was, like, prospecting in the area. And I don't know if he explained to them what happened.
Right.
But they were the ones who brought him back to civilization, because it would be extremely difficult for him to get back to, like, his camp area and where he was supposed to be picked up. Like,
right.
because you have no idea where you are.
Yeah, you don't know what direction you're taking off in or anything.
Yeah, I think he was just trying to get back to the water, the salt water.
Right.
You know. But yeah, he ran into those guys and had probably one of the craziest Bigfoot experiences ever.
Right. See, and that's a story that I remember from when we were kids. I honestly think I saw it in the National Enquirer of all places, which is not a great news source, but a good story source anyway. Yeah. And then I also read about it in a couple of paranormal books and everything like that.
There was an old TV show here in Canada where they recreated it.
Oh,
they told the story and actually made like a recreation, which was kind of cool.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
So what do you feel about what I guess nowadays can be seen as a lack of fear in the stories, I guess? You know, back in the day, with Albert Ostman's story, that's a story that happening to anybody should induce a drastic fear response. And it's a good story because it has all the elements of a good horror story. You have the lack of control in your situation. No matter how much he had prepared, he had his rifle, his boots, and even his pack with him, and he still had zero control once he was up over the shoulder of this creature. You have the reveal of the creature being something he's never seen before and has no idea how to interact with. And to the point, even down to the solution to his predicament is not a simple fight your way out. It's like a trick the monster trick one monster, scare another, and then just run. You know, it's this escape. And we don't really see that with Bigfoot nowadays. The stories aren't so much fear-based. They're more intrigue, I guess, more people trying to explain something that they saw to a degree. Obviously, you've explained two of your experiences, I guess, where the fear is very real when it's happening. And what is it exactly that you're, I don't want to say afraid of, but what is it in those moments that really triggers that fear response?
It's like a very primal like fear response. It's not like watching a scary movie fear response. It's like something actually very bad could happen because you know something's out there,
right? And
because you've heard it. It's not like, you know, getting creeped out by something. It's like a genuine like, holy crap, something is going to happen and I'm going to have to react in a certain way,
right,
if I want to live.
Right.
That's like the feeling you get. But it's also very dependent on the person too. And like with the stories, some people will get scared from some sort of stories and some people won't.
Right.
It's just the way it is. Whether it be based on like age or just, you know, everyone's different. I mean, yeah. You like the Albert Ostman story. That's like, when I was younger, I was creeped out by that. And when I go out into the woods by myself and I think of that, I'm like, well, it's kind of creeping me out.
Right.
But it's because I'm relating that story to what I'm, you know, the setting I'm in.
Right. Well, time. And I think that's maybe that's why Bigfoot stories are some of the best to tell while you're camping too, is you're essentially saying, in this exact scenario, this happened.
Yeah.
You know, I guess because it's interesting to me, I guess, because when you look at the Bigfoot community on the internet and just, I mean, the Bigfoot community in general nowadays, it seems very far removed from something that people are afraid of, you know? Even when you look at these horror channels and stuff on YouTube, mine basically trying to come up into the community, you don't see top 10 lists of creepy Bigfoot sightings generally.
They're out there.
Right. But if you look at like top 10 or top 15 horror clips of stuff like that, it's almost always ghosts nowadays more than anything.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting. I think it says a lot about our society and what we're afraid of. And there's a part of me that thinks that one of the reasons why people aren't as afraid of Bigfoot nowadays is because we are not nearly as close to nature in that sense. We're not out that's not where we live anymore, you know?
Yeah, the majority of people aren't thinking about, being out in the woods and running into Bigfoot.
Right. Most people are thinking about being in a house and seeing a ghost.
Exactly.
I think that's an interesting thing to look at when it comes to just fear in general, what a society is afraid of. When you are afraid of, ghosts in a house, one of the scariest things about ghosts in a house is that if it's your house, you are stuck there.
Yeah, that's your place.
Right. And so with Bigfoot, if you are living in the bush, you have no real escape from that except to leave the area. But even then, there's no walls to protect you necessarily. It's interesting. And even when you have walls to protect you, you get stories like the Ape Canyon incident. A quick rundown essentially was in Washington was it not also 1924?
It was 1924.
Right.
Yeah.
So a group of miners set up a cabin, and while they had struck, or they had found a gold vein or something, right?
They had some sort of claim out there.
Right.
They were finding gold, which is why they built the cabin.
Right.
Because they knew they were going to be there for a lengthy period of time working. And
so shortly after, it had started almost immediately, had it not, with finding tracks and hearing things?
Well, I think it was like a couple years even prior, they had found tracks and had been hearing weird like whistling noises and things like that.
Right.
It wasn't until like after they built the cabin that things started getting really weird.
Right. That's when one of the miners saw one of the creatures and fired on it and claimed to have hit it at least 3 times. And the story from what I read is very hit or miss.
You'll hear different versions of it, kind of.
Yeah.
Like I've heard it was shot more like 15, 16 times.
Right. And some stories say that they killed it and it fell. Some stories say that it ran down into the canyon. But then that night, after that incident, they had decided, we have to leave, but it's too late to leave now. So we'll leave first thing in the morning. And they had kind of hunkered down in their cabin. And then all hell broke loose shortly after the sun went down, where they claimed that they were attacked by several of these creatures, like slamming into the cabin walls and throwing stones and boulders essentially at the cabin, punching holes in the cabin, chinking, and
trying to dig under
the cabin essentially. Yeah. So that's another story that is prime horror material.
Yeah.
Because once again, there's zero control other than inside your cabin. That's the only control you have. So you're limited to where you are in control. And even then, you're losing control because your cabin is, to a degree, trying to be torn down around you. And you are completely trapped, isolated. And it seems from what they talked about that defending themselves was more of trying to get these creatures to understand them. They would shoot while the creatures were attacking, and then as soon as the creatures stopped attacking, they would hold off. They wouldn't fire, trying to communicate to the Sasquatch, we're only attacking you because you're attacking us, which in hindsight probably wasn't a great thing because they had already shot at one creature that was just looking at them. So if Bigfoot is like this intelligent being, it's too late, you know? But that's another great story and another famous story. And I think, we don't hear the most famous Bigfoot stories from history aren't the ones where someone just saw Bigfoot. It's the ones where something insane happened with Bigfoot, whether you were kidnapped or your cabin was attacked. It wasn't until the Patterson footage and then everything afterwards where footage became the story. People would talk about sightings and have casts, like print casts done and everything like that. But even now with the internet, especially, you see it with your channel. The story isn't the the telling of witnessing a Bigfoot. Now we seem to need this tangible video proof that it happened. When you try and just tell somebody a story about Bigfoot, it seems most people are willing to just go, yeah, it's probably a bear. Or
But you get that a lot with the footage as well.
Well, yeah, I guess.
I mean, nowadays, like, I used to be all about the footage, and I review footage a lot. Like, I like going over it and providing my thoughts, but to me the most interesting elements are those stories, and when you hear about who the people were, and you kind of hear their background, and like for the Albert Ostman thing, it was a person who didn't believe in Bigfoot, didn't even know it existed, and then it happened to them.
Right.
But then I was thinking maybe he heard about this Ape Canyon story and then like made it up.
Well, but
or something like that. They both happened in the same year,
I guess, and like a month apart, right?
Yeah, something
or
like
2
that.
months or something. But it's interesting, I think, with the Bigfoot topic specifically. I guess maybe as an outsider to the Bigfoot community, where I'm not in it like you're in it, you know? I don't hear Bigfoot stories that are meant to create fear like they used to, you know? Now the Bigfoot stories I hear are the stories of people trying to say they saw it as proof of its existence. And whether it exists or not, the stories we all know from the past are in our vernacular, they're in our lexicon because they were good stories. And now what really stands the test of time, and what's going to stand the test of time, is the videos. And I think that we're gonna see that with ghosts as well, and aliens and everything like that. We're gonna start losing the really intense stories in exchange for what could be seen as much more tame video footage, where it's just, look what I saw. And it can still be creepy, obviously, you know. If you see a really good piece of footage and you're like, man, like, that reinforces that idea that these things are out there, you can gain some fear value, I guess, out of that. But for whatever reason, and this is obviously my opinion, it was the stories, the really dramatic stories, that really hit the creepy factor, because you had all these elements to a really good story. Whether, like I said, whether they were true or not, they persisted because people told them over and over again because they were terrifying. So in like the 5 years that you've been looking into the Bigfoot phenomenon, what do you think the scariest story and or piece of footage you've got to experience is?
Oh, goodness. The scariest story? You mean story as in like an old legend or like an anecdote from recent times?
Either way. They're all stories, right? But some of them, obviously, you being in the community and kind of having a direct line to witnesses who are the ones starting these stories.
The most interesting thing, actually, as far as stories go, is if you've seen Expedition Sasquatch 2, which is one of the films on my YouTube channel, I interview a guy named Ken Walker. He's a champion taxidermist, like world level.
Right.
He used to work at the Smithsonian Museum.
He was the one who made that Bigfoot.
He made a Bigfoot replica.
Right.
Before I interviewed him, we talked for like a couple hours. I'm like, man, we should be filming this because it was good stuff.
Right.
But it was crazy. This guy knew so much. Like, it was shocking. I'm like, he was just going on and on with these stories that aren't stories that you hear. They're not popular stories because they haven't been shared anywhere, like online or on TV or anywhere. They're stories that he's either has been told by the actual people, or they've been floating around the hunting community in Alberta here. But there was one story, he said, where there was this younger gentleman. He was walking along this river or creek or something. He was probably 16 or 17. Had a rifle. It was hunting season. and he ended up running into one of these creatures. Apparently, it was like a large male, and it was looking at him, and it started running towards him like it was going to take him. And the kid fired a shot over its head. I don't know if he was trying to hit it or not, but he didn't. He didn't hit it.
Right.
And the creature turned around and took off. But it's one of those stories where you think, man, if that kid didn't have a gun, maybe that thing would have taken him, and he'd be like a new missing 411 case.
Right.
And you hear stories like that haven't been like floating around on the internet.
They haven't made it to the zeitgeist, I guess.
Yeah. Well, this kid was in his shop and had seen the replica of the creature and almost like broke down because it had that much of a traumatic effect on him, I guess.
Right.
Things like that you hear are really crazy. Those are my favorite stories too. Like, I don't know. The creepiest ones are when people go missing and they try and relate it to Bigfoot.
Right.
Like I said, the missing 411 thing.
Right.
When you think maybe there's these Bigfoot creatures out there and maybe they're taking people. Like we talked a long time ago about the Dennis Martin case.
Yep.
Yeah, so the Dennis Martin case, they never found him. But there was, I remember there's one point in the story where apparently a family saw some sort of being running off like with a kid.
Right.
Like either holding onto it or the kid was like on its back or something like that.
And it's interesting that those stories still come up because of the old Native American legends, talking about there are some stories of these wild men stealing women from tribes and children, or cannibalizing people from their tribes and stuff.
Yeah, I think the most prominent legends like that up north here are the ones in the Nahanni Valley. The Nahanni Valley has like a very wide range of, I guess, descriptions of this creature. There's different types of Bigfoot-like creatures in the Nahanni Valley in the Yukon.
Right.
There's the Nukluk. There's one called the Nakani. There's one called the Tujanuk. And I believe that one is also very closely related, I guess, in legend to the Wendigo.
Okay.
That name has come up. But there's creatures where they're wearing almost like primitive clothes even, which is very strange. But you mostly hear them up there described as like cannibalistic giants and a very warlike people.
Okay.
Which I don't know if those are Sasquatch or if they're just some sort of tribe. I mean, I'm sure like the diversity between people was even stranger back then.
Yeah.
Like there's lots of talk about giants.
Yeah, well, that's another thing with the wild man stories from around the world. It's interesting that almost every culture has these stories of giants in general, right? And sometimes those giant stories are directly related to wild man stories, and other times it seems like they're a separate thing, but
there are also a lot of biblical stories too.
Right.
But yeah, to me the scariest thing I think is actually when people go missing, because that's something that you relate to when you're out in the woods as well. It's
right.
Like you imagine something taking you, like the Albert Ostman thing. He could have been a missing 411 star. He didn't escape. There's no stories of people going missing or being taken or having really anything bad happen to them when they have a rifle. That's a fact. Like, I don't know of any stories where a person with a rifle didn't make it out or was killed or actually vanished forever. Could have been Albert Ostman, but
right.
He was equipped.
Now, this isn't so much about the story of Bigfoot. This is a more personal question. Something that came up on your channel not too long ago. Someone or some people thought that if you're afraid of this thing, you shouldn't be, I guess, looking for it. Now, to me, that's a very irrational thought. I think you should have a healthy amount of fear for anything that, if legends are true, could kill you easily.
I'm scared to go to this job interview. I don't think I'm going to go.
Yeah, right? So do you think that people put up a front in a situation where chances are they don't? Well, actually, I want to say, I don't want to come out and say that somebody lied, but I believe in that comment they said that they had interacted with Bigfoot.
Yes, and we're also dealing with a comment section.
Right, absolutely.
So we don't know what is really going on.
It could have been a troll, but it's interesting to me that there are some people who think that Bigfoot isn't something to be afraid of, and there are other people who think it is something that you should not even be out there looking for.
If you think it's real, I think you should also be like afraid to some degree. If you're not, then you will probably die.
Right. Well, and fear is a natural survival response. It is what keeps you alive in dangerous situations. I mean, I feel a good dose of fear if I see a bear and I'm not inside a vehicle or have some sort of barrier between me and that bear.
Yeah.
I just find it very interesting, and this doesn't just fit into the Bigfoot community. This transcends, I think, just the horror community. The reason that I like horror is because of the fear. There's an adrenaline kick, and it's exciting to feel fear, especially in the sense of storytelling or movie watching, whichever way you consume your horror. If it can make you creeped out, that to me is why I love this stuff. It's exciting. It's my, I don't want to say I'll never do it, but right now I don't want to jump out of a plane, so I'll get my adrenaline from watching creepy videos on YouTube or reading scary stories or whatever, right? So I've always found it fascinating that in any sense of horror, there seems to be this ego that comes along with it, where people think they're tough or
there's no such thing as tough when you're talking about going up against the Sasquatch. It's not going to matter no human on Earth, if the Sasquatch are what we think they are or what they're described as, there's no human on Earth with, that doesn't have any sort of tool or technology to help defend, against the Sasquatch. There's no person that would be able to stand up against it.
Well, I mean, unless you have a gun, right?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying, like tools or technology.
Right. Well, without that, you are lower on the food chain.
You should be afraid of it. It's not a bad thing to say you're afraid of something.
Right, and that's what I want to get to, is that it seems like it's one thing, like for me,
might be like almost like a competition type thing between people who are looking for it. Oh, I'm tougher than you, so I'll probably find it. Or you probably shouldn't do this because you're a pretty big wimp. Right.
So, and that's the thing is, for me as a horror fan, I'm a horror fan because this stuff freaks me out sometimes. I'm bummed out when I see a horror movie that isn't scary or creepy, at least.
Which is 9 times out of 10
nowadays, yeah. But it's interesting too, because there's a fascination with those things. I say on my channel that we are fans of fear and the things that make us feel it, because I am a fan of feeling fear, but I'm also not like you in the sense that I'm going to go out and look for something that could kill me. I like controlled fear, I guess. Fear that I can see and interpret and feel the fear, but I know that I'm not in imminent danger.
Yeah.
But even in that situation, there are people where if I say that, man, reading about the Wendigo and doing the research on the Wendigo, it creeped me out. I thought about it for a while, and after I recorded it and did all my research and everything, it was a story that, I'd be laying in bed at night and then just think about it and be like, man, that'd be creepy as hell, Yeah. If I were to admit that to certain people, you get well, don't be such a wuss. It's obviously it's not that scary, blah, blah, blah. And that's an interesting human personality trait, I guess. It's weird that fear has become competitive, where the less fear you feel, supposedly the stronger you are. But to me,
the less human you are.
To me, that fear is exhilarating, and I don't want to lose that feeling. And I think that's why I like hearing your stories. You're, one of my best friends. And when you tell me about you being in a situation that scared the crap out of you, I kind of get to feel that fear vicariously through you.
It's different when it's someone you know, and it's like a more personal thing that is more than likely real, right? Than when you're watching something on TV.
Right.
Especially for us, like, we're into movies and how movies are made and stuff like that. So when we're watching movies, we know it's hard to get lost in it like we used to when we were kids, right?
Yeah.
So it's like,
it's also
we know
hard
it's a movie.
It's also hard not to tear it apart when something is done that you think is poorly done.
Yeah. It's different when you're talking to somebody that you trust who's sharing like something that just happened, like an actual experience.
Right.
The cool thing about Bigfoot and looking for Bigfoot or Bigfoot evidence as opposed to doing something like ghost hunting is that when you're ghost hunting, you're in an environment that's much more controlled. And when you're Bigfoot hunting, there is a plethora of other things that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And the Bigfoot is probably the least likely thing to hurt you.
It's lower on the list of likely causes of death and or injury when you're out in the bush.
I mean, just hurting yourself walking is probably the number one thing that could happen. And then you're dealing with other animals in particular,
Right, you have bears and wolves, and
those are the things that I'm more worried about. I don't get creeped out by them, but I feel them as like a threat.
Right.
Like an actual threat that I should be prepared for, but they don't creep me out
not like
the thought of Bigfoot.
Right. Well, and I think that I think that creeped out feeling comes from that unknown.
Yeah.
You know what a bear is, and you know that it can kill you. So you just essentially are like, well, I better prepare for a bear.
Yeah.
With Sasquatch, if you get creeped out, not because you know it's there and you know it's real, you get creeped out because if it is there, who knows what it's going to do to you. Your brain gets to fill in the blanks of, is it going to rip my limbs from my torso? And,
even the idea, like when you're out there and it's turning into dusk and you're sitting there alone, you have your little fire going, and you just imagine that maybe they're somewhere in the tree line just standing there watching you, and maybe that's all they do. Just that creeps me out. Like, look, I'm getting goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking of that. The guy I was out with the other weekend, Keenan, he had an encounter where he was sleeping in this tent, and something went up to like where his head was in the tent, and it was a hand essentially pushed onto the tent and rested on his face.
Oh my god!
So he had this hand on his face for like a minute, and it took its hand off, and it did it again. And he said he could feel like fingers and stuff.
Oh my god!
And he was just like frozen there in the tent. It might not have been a minute, because like time kind of slows down in those situations. But he said like he didn't hear it walking away or approaching, so he was getting creeped out because he thought that it could have just been standing there, watching his tent, like right there for a long period of time.
Hours.
Like stories like those are creepy stories.
Absolutely.
And you're hearing them directly from the source.
Yeah. And I think this is a good time to say that those are the stories that I would love to feature on this podcast. The direct from the source stories, listener stories. So if anybody out there has creepy stories, it honestly, it could be a run-in with a serial killer. It could be ghost stories, Bigfoot stories, alien stories, anything. Those are the stories that I want to feature on this podcast, so that for those of us that love hearing those stories, we have a place that we can come to and share those stories with each other. I'm going to share some of my own personal stories on future episodes, but what I would love for this to become is a place for where people can come and tell their stories, true or not. Honestly, I'm not going to post it and say that everything that people send to me is fact. What I'm going to do is post what comes in and is a good creepy story. If you want to send in stories, you can send them to the email, which is lonecrowpod@gmail.com, lonecrowpod@gmail.com. That's kind of what I say. I usually say that for the end, but we're going to jump real quick to Bigfoot in pop culture. Obviously, I mentioned that Bigfoot seems to be this huge thing still. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of people on the internet that talk about it. And I mean, you're a member of the community, so you know it's not necessarily a small community out there. What's some of your favorite Bigfoot media to consume?
I've been recently getting into old documentaries or mockumentaries. Most of the documentaries from the 70s are fake.
Okay.
The one I recently watched that I really like, it's called Sasquatch, The Legend of Bigfoot. I think that's what it's called. You can find it on Amazon Prime. And it's straight up fake because they say it's in like British Columbia when it was filmed in like Montana or something like that. Like,
okay.
It's all like a show basically.
Right.
But there's some good like wildlife footage in there that I was surprised. Like, how did they film this? There's a scene in it where their little caravan of horses is going along this path or this road, and a mountain lion jumps down from this cliff onto one of the horses and like attacks it. And I'm
Jesus.
like, wow, like how did they get this footage?
They just tied that horse up and waited for a mountain lion to
Well,
eat
if
it,
you've
probably.
seen that nowadays, it would have been all CGI. Right?
Yeah.
But it just looks so good, and they go over the Ape Canyon thing and have like a really creepy recreation of it. It's just a really fun and entertaining documentary. Films like that, obviously, when like a new Bigfoot documentary comes out, I try and watch it.
Right.
There's also some movies from the 90s, I think. The early 90s. There's one, I can't remember what it's called, but the lead in it is one of the kids from Home Improvement.
Okay.
The older brother. And he ends up like befriending this Sasquatch. I remember some of these old movies, like actual like family movies when I was a kid, they really creeped me out.
Right.
Like there was one where I couldn't watch it. It just showed the first clip. It showed of this Bigfoot and it's like big eyes. Like freaked me out when I was a little kid. I couldn't watch it. But yeah, I like those movies. I like the old documentaries.
What did you think about The Man Who Killed Hitler and then Bigfoot?
I wanted to do a video, like an actual video review of that movie, because I really did not like it at all. It was the worst portrayal of Sasquatch I've ever seen. And the whole movie, the whole first half of the movie was just useless and didn't provide really anything to the story. Like, it was boring.
I brought it up because I knew it would trigger you.
You knew it would trigger me? I'm really triggered right now. And that movie is going off the assumption that there's one Bigfoot creature.
Right.
And it's very silly. I'm not going to give anything away, but just watch it and you'll know what I'm talking about.
So one of my favorite Bigfoot movies, because it is very schlocky and fun, but not necessarily scary, was Exists by Eduardo Sanchez, the guy who made the Blair Witch Project.
I watched it. I didn't like it.
No, you didn't like it. Why? Why?
I couldn't get sucked into it. I don't know why. I love the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite scary movies. But that Exists movie, I think it has to do with like the cliche of having like the young group of people go to a cabin. I'm just tired of it. Honestly, the one Bigfoot movie that is more recent, it's kind of older now, it's a few years old, it's called Willow Creek.
I don't think I've heard of them.
It's like a found footage one.
Okay.
I actually enjoyed it.
I'll have to check that one out.
It's not very deep, but I enjoyed it quite a bit.
See, and I liked Exists Maybe because I'm not so close to the Bigfoot topic, but I enjoyed it as I think there's a good portion of horror fans that love bad horror movies.
Oh yeah,
because they're just fun to watch.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm one of those people. I love a really good bad horror movie. And that was just one of those ones where I was like, man, this is hilarious.
There hasn't been a good Bigfoot movie ever that I'm aware of. I had like high hopes for The Man Who Killed Hitler and then Bigfoot because there's two things I like, World War II and Bigfoot.
Right.
Two things I'm very interested in.
Well,
and I thought they were going to take it very seriously. But it was just like... it really just set me off, man. So
let's put a call out then. If you have Bigfoot films that you think me or Justin would enjoy that you consider to be really good films, let us know and we'll check them out. And now we'll jump over quickly to video games because we're both gamers. I know you had just recently, well, I guess not recently, a few months ago, put a video on your YouTube channel of you playing a Bigfoot game.
Yeah, there's a game called Bigfoot. I think it used to be called Finding Bigfoot, like the show.
Okay.
But it's just on there. It's called Bigfoot now on Steam. If you go on there and search Bigfoot, it's pretty much the only Bigfoot game. But you are a Bigfoot hunter, and you have a rifle, night vision, drones, thermal cameras, bear traps, things like that you can deploy out into the forest. So I expect
that the next expedition you go on, you're going to have all of those things.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Bear traps, for sure. Dude, one of my other fears is what if you accidentally came across a bear trap or something? Like one of those old traps and stepped in it and you're out on your own.
Yeah. You're going with that, what is that movie, 127 Hours or whatever, where he cuts off his own arm to get out?
Oh, yeah, where he's trapped by the boulder.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a nightmare.
Yeah. So is that really the only Bigfoot game out there?
Yeah, but it's cool. You actually
it's
have
good,
to,
though?
You have to kill the Bigfoot, basically. I've never done it yet.
You haven't done it yet?
No. I get stressed out on some of these games that have jump scares. A lot of horror games actually I don't finish.
The majority of horror games are full of jump scares.
For whatever reason, I get stressed out when I play horror games, and I think the only one I've beaten recently was the Alien Isolation game.
That was a good one.
Because I like the Alien movies a lot.
Speaking of video games, that is another plan for the YouTube channel / I guess future Twitch channel, is that I will be, hopefully when I can get better than dial-up internet essentially at my house,
yeah.
I want to do some horror game streaming and stuff like that. But I think the difference between horror video games and horror movies is that yes, usually both are chock full of jump scares, but it is way easier to disassociate from a horror movie. When you feel like a jump scare is coming, it's very easily to tell yourself it's coming, just wait for it, it hits, and then you move on to the next one. In a horror game, you are the one causing the jump scare. You know that if you continue on, there's a good chance something's going to jump out at you.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have to make that decision, and you can't really brace for it. You can kind of be like, it's going to happen, it's coming, but it's on you to make it happen. And so you're like, oh, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. Well, there's some of those games, like the Outlast games.
Mm-hmm.
I can only play for 15 minutes at a time. And I just shut it off, and I'm like, nope. Because it's seriously, I think it's just expecting something's going to happen, and then, I know I'm going to have to run away from something. Why am I doing this? It's stressing me out.
See, that's where I, as a big horror fan, that's what gets me going in those games. It's all right, here we go, we're diving in. And if I do get the Twitch thing going where people can watch me play it, I mean, 90% of the entertainment factor in watching people play horror games is seeing them freak the hell out.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Oh, yeah. Well, the cool thing is, okay, a lot of people don't like video games, You know,
In general?
Well, there's when I put out that video of the Bigfoot game,
Right.
there's a lot of people saying like video games are like a waste of time, and
Mm.
you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
But as far as entertainment goes, they're way better than movies.
Yeah.
As far as like experiencing things, especially the horror ones.
Yeah.
I can't get scared in a horror movie like I do when I'm playing a horror game.
Right. Well, and I think in the interest of not straying off topic too far, I'll use it to tie it in with storytelling. Video games are storytelling. It is a way to tell a story that is interactive, and most people enjoy video games that give you a choice in the outcome, because it's not someone telling you a story. You are affecting the story. You are experiencing the story. And I think that's why some people seem to have problems with video games and see them as a waste of time, because they don't see them as storytelling. I could sit down and read a book for 8 hours and everyone would be A-okay with that.
Yeah, but you're just lying there.
Yeah, but I think it's just a stigma thing. Obviously it's the nerds play video games kind of outlook on things, but it is definitely an experience and a story, and a good video game with a good story can be, I could sit and play I don't think I could play a horror game for 8 hours straight. I'm pretty sure I would be exhausted a few hours in, but a good story in a game is just as good as a good movie or a good book, and to some degree can be even more of an experience, just because you are interacting with the story.
Yeah.
So, and you're causing things to happen in the
there
story.
Are crazy technological feats as well.
Well, yeah.
Like making games as opposed to pointing a camera at something. I guess for movies, I mean, there's people that make the special effects and like visual effects, and
we have to look at like practical effects. Like in the last episode that I did about werewolves, I briefly mentioned the transformation scene in the American Werewolf in London. And you can watch that clip on YouTube. It's like, I think 2 minutes long or something like that. And it is disgusting. It is really, and it's all like practical effects of watching somebody transform into this like monster. And you see like the hands stretching and the feet stretching, the snout, and you hear all the bones breaking. You watch the spine fill in and the claws and everything. It's insane. And that is just, you'll notice I've noticed anyway, in the horror film community, the practical effects are a huge talking point, because it can make or break a movie. Yeah. Really good practical effects
make really good hoaxes.
Really good practical effects outdo even kind of good CGI.
Yeah.
And we've seen this in the horror community, and we've seen a call to filmmakers to cut back on the CGI and start using practical effects more. And I don't think it's this like hipster idea of, well, it was better with practical. It was better with practical effects.
Oh yeah.
Because when you see CGI, you have the problem with the uncanny valley, right?
Yeah.
Where something looks so close, but it's just not quite there, and it takes you out of it. Where with the practical effects, you have to a good effect creator has to make it seem real and blend into the environment around it, and seem natural in it. And so it forces you as the viewer to essentially have to accept it as you're seeing what you're seeing. You have to believe. Whereas with CGI, you can see it and go, I mean, it doesn't look like anything else there. It sticks out too much.
I think one of the best movies that I've seen as far as like practical effects goes is The Abyss. Have you seen The Abyss?
Is that the Spelunker, the cave?
No. Well, no.
Which one is that one?
I think that one was also produced by James Cameron, actually.
Or is
it's about like an underwater rig where this team of like workers are going to like find this submarine that was. I don't want to give it away for people who haven't seen it, but just it's actually hard to find a copy online.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you have to get the DVD. You either have to order it off Amazon or go to an actual store that sells DVDs because there's no like streaming platforms that have it.
Okay.
But it's all practical effects. They filmed the whole movie underwater with like diving suits and everything.
Okay.
Like, it's insane.
And this is a...
Yeah. All of his old movies, man, it's all practical effects and stuff. Like, to tie Bigfoot back into practical effects, though, Patterson footage, I think there's a good chance that that's real. Like, I think it's probably real.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a suit.
Well,
after looking at it so thoroughly.
Well, and with the amount of examination that people have done over the years, the majority of people seem to agree with you on that.
If you come to that point where you can say, I'm pretty sure the Patterson footage is real, then you're essentially saying Bigfoot's got to be real.
Well, yeah.
If that's real, then Bigfoot's real.
Yeah. That
which is like I'm always very cautious of saying something is Bigfoot or not Bigfoot or probably Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. But when I see the Patterson footage and I watch these videos on it and I look closely at the frames or I'm listening to podcasts and I hear all the information from all these different people that have actually like, you know, have seen the original film strips, like, because what you see on the internet usually is not the original. It's like,
right.
It's been transferred to digital and then passed around so many times that you lose so much quality. But when you hear stories from the people who have been actually analyzing it and like the experts and people in like the Hollywood costume industry and people like that, and then even like Bob Gimlin, like the guy who was actually there, it's hard to like discount it and to say that it was a hoax.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an impressive piece of footage for sure. And I mean, one that has been in pop culture, especially in Bigfoot culture, for 50 years now.
And has stood the test of time.
Yeah, I mean...
all that criticism, like, it hasn't been disproved.
Well, yeah, and that's, I think, what keeps it there, you know, is that it's been 50 years and no one has been able to come out and say, this is how it was done, and it's all fake.
And it's, like, the most clear piece of footage ever. Isn't that crazy? It's been that long and there's not
anything better.
We got these 8K cameras nowadays and we got nothing on that.
All right, so for now, I think we're going to leave the Bigfoot topic here. Obviously, this isn't going to be the end for Bigfoot because being that Justin Chernipeski is one of my good friends, and he is deeply embedded in the Bigfoot community, I'm going to try and get him to come on as much as I can to regale us with Sasquatch stories.
Yes, if you ever need your Bigfoot fix and you're not already subscribed to Mountain Beast Mysteries, go on and do that.
That's Mountain Beast Mysteries on YouTube. What do you do there?
Well, we have expedition videos, you know, showing our adventures out in the field. And then I like to review footage, review stories, and just talk about Bigfoot, you know, and have that little community of people, you know, that likes to share their thoughts.
It's all Bigfoot all the time.
All Bigfoot all the time. Usually, yeah.
So, yeah, go check him out. And like I said, or like we've said, Justin will probably be on future discussion episodes where we talk about other things. I know both of us have some fairly creepy stories from growing up about other topics, ghosts, aliens, things like that. So we'll probably do some, I think maybe the next discussion episode will be more of just us telling some of the weirder stories that we've experienced. I think that'll be fun.
Yeah.
And if you would like to contribute to an episode with some stories, feel free to send in your stories to lonecrowpod@gmail.com. It's lonecrowpod@gmail.com. Kind of what I'm hoping to be able to do at some point in the future is start putting together listener story episodes where you guys can either email your stories in and have me narrate them, or you can record yourself telling your stories and send them in, and I'll just feature them in a future episode. I'll basically just be the curator of your stories. and put them in some episodes for everyone to, listen to and enjoy your stories. So if you want to be a part of that, I would love to have you. Send an email. You can also get a hold of me on the Facebook page, The Lone Crow Podcast, or Instagram or Twitter at LoneCrow_pod. And if you just want to listen to the podcast, by all means, feel free to go on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify to download. And I want to give a shout out real quick to BC Timber for leaving a 5-star review on iTunes for the podcast. It helps a bunch for people to find us and join the community. So if you could leave a review wherever you're available to do so, that'd be awesome. It'd help out so much. And let's open up the discussions in the comments too. I mean, I so far I've had a lot of people talking directly to me in the comments on YouTube, which by all means, I love that. You guys are super supportive. And like I said in the short video that I made a couple weeks ago, it really does keep that fire burning under my ass to keep me going on this thing. It's very encouraging, and I love you guys for it. But also don't be afraid to just, talk to each other in the comments. And this community doesn't have to revolve around my channel or me in particular. It's just kind of my way of starting something that everybody can get involved in. So if you guys want to go ahead and do that, or even if you guys, want to do it on the Facebook page or whatever, feel free to do so. So for now, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Lone Crow Podcast.